What was Levon like?
Incredibly charismatic.
Welcome to the Marinade, a free-flowing conversation about the creative process with creative people. Each episode, we welcome musicians, actors, comedians, authors, visual artists, filmmakers, anyone who creates art to talk about how and why we make stuff. This is episode 188, and our guest is Scott Sharrard of the legendary band Little Feat. Little Feat has enjoyed a nearly 6-decade career that has spawned some bona fide classics, songs that even if you don't think you know Little Feat, you do. Dixie Chicken and Willin, just legendary band with legendary output. The new album from Little Feat, Strike Up the Band, captures the essence that made Little Feat legends while also sounding fresh. Scott is a fascinating guy. The story behind Little Feat is fascinating, and we dove into all of that. In addition to his work with Little Feat, Scott also served as the band leader for the Gregg Allman Band for about a decade, and then also has his band, the Chesterfields, as well as some solo work. Just a really interesting guy, and we covered a lot of ground. Everyone, my conversation with Scott Sharrard of Little Feat.
Almost where I need to be, yeah. And I ain't gonna lie to you. You're the only one for me.
I just got a new camera, and I thought I was really, because I am trying to get into video. I just, like, I don't see trends coming. I've been doing this show since 2017, and I just, like, am 2 steps behind all the time. Like, I'm not a visionary, you know? So I tried to get this like new fancy camera, and I feel like it looks just like my computer camera. So, but you got a good camera. You look great.
No, I did the full pandemic when it happened.
Oh, right on. Yeah.
I set up the whole thing. I set up a recording studio. I set up a teaching studio. I ended up having to do I did a bunch of live concerts with live feeds and stuff out of friends' basements in Woodstock when I was up there. It was nuts.
Oh, wow. Man, I was just talking about that recently, how I'm like oddly nostalgic for the pandemic. I mean, people dying, that part sucked, but people getting sick and dying, not cool. But as far as like my life, because I was so privileged to like get to work from home and just spend quality time with my family, and like it slowed me down too. And then also it opened up this. Like, I didn't used to do Zoom interviews. I would wait until an artist was in Orlando or close by, or I would travel to meet them somewhere. And this just opened up everything, the Zoom thing. So I'm really grateful I get to connect with folks like you, because I mean, who knows when we're going to be in the same town, you know?
Yeah. And you released this as a podcast also?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's on YouTube and podcast then? Is that kind of
Well, I typically don't. Like I said, I'm trying to get to a place where I release the video, but historically it is on YouTube, but it's just the audio. So I've only done audio, and I'm trying to move toward video because people like to watch people talk. For me, I'd rather just listen, but I know a lot of people feel like they're a part of the conversation if they can watch it. So that is a movement that I'm trying to make. I've just been slow going because, this is like a passion project more than anything, right? So like it doesn't pay the bills yet, but that's something that I'm working on. So
yeah, I'm a total podcast Substack chunky.
Nice. Yeah, I saw that. It seems like you have a Substack, right? I was just looking at your Instagram.
Yeah, I got into that last year. I mean, I've always been doing a lot of obviously lyric writing, but I've also done a lot of essays on the side. And I did a couple for different magazines. What was it, Bitter Southerner? I did some stuff for them, and kind of the more traditional route. And then when Substack, I forget how it got on maybe it was Heather Cox Richardson got it on my radar, and then I started following her there, and then I got super into the platform.
Cool. I haven't messed with it. I have a Patreon and I publish essays and bonus content over there.
I got to check that out. Now you
Yeah,
should come over on Substack, man. It's been I mean it's generated, my essay writing has generated more revenue than, my streaming royalties,
interesting. Okay.
from
Yeah.
streaming platforms.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, speaking of streaming platforms, this Little Feat record is so good, man. It's been such a pleasure to get to listen to it, and I want to talk about it. I want to talk about so much with you. You've lived such a fascinating life, and I'm really interested to talk to you about Little Feat and then also some of your other projects, including writing. But just off the top, like Strike Up the Band is just fantastic, and I can't wait for folks to hear it, man. Just really great job.
Wow, thanks, man. That means a lot, coming from you and your show, and especially that shirt you have on.
I got to see him twice in the last month. I saw him solo. I'm wearing my Jason Isbell shirt for folks who are listening. This shirt actually has a bit of a story because this particular shirt in 2015 they had it at the merch table, and he played the Florida Theater in Jacksonville, and then he played the Plaza right down the street here in Orlando. And I went to both dates, of course, because I'm an obsessive fan. And they had it at the merch table at in in Jacksonville, and I was like, I'll just get it tomorrow night. And then they didn't have it. They didn't have my size the next night. So then it went out of print. So for 10 years they didn't have this shirt. And I just went and saw him solo in to play his new album in Nashville, and they had this at the merch table, and I was like, gotta have that. It's got the pronunciation on it. Like it's just such a wonderful sort of fate, I don't know. It's just such a great
Yeah.
memory, so I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, Isbell. I mean, the first time I met him, his wife, at the time, Amanda Shires, was opening for the Gregg Allman Band, and we did a couple nights at the Ryman with Greg, and Jason came down and played with her for both sets, and
Oh,
I
wow.
got to meet him, and I don't know why he didn't sit. I feel like they had to split each night or something. Like I don't know why he didn't sit in on those gigs, but she ended up joining us to sit in a little bit. She ended up doing a whole summer of gigs with us. And the funny thing is, her manager at the time was Brian Penix, who's now working with us through Vector with Little Feat.
Oh, cool.
So the music business is a small world. But Jason, he's always been lovely and supportive, to me, and he's even come down and sat in on some of my solo gigs, like at the Brooklyn Bowl when we played there. He came down and played with me, and he's just amazing, man. He's great. He's so I'm sure your listeners know what a good interview he is, and that he's a really funny and nuanced man. And I've been nominated for Grammys 3 times. I lost 2 of them to Jason and 1 to Taj Mahal. So I keep losing them to my friends, who are the best there is.
Yeah, I was gonna
So,
say, like, if you got to lose them to those
it's-
guys, that's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's one very tight knit family. All these bands, and I think in the end we're all kind of playing rock and roll. I mean, I think Taj obviously is a legitimate blues man, but the thing with Taj is like he always goes in so many directions, and Jason does that, and Little Feat does that, and my favorite artists don't have any barriers of entry with genre or anything. So I think we all share that in common.
Well, okay, so let's talk a little bit about that, and really my entry point to that conversation is going to be, you mentioned the Gregg Allman Band, and now you're with Little Feat. I mean, these are legends, right? These are like these larger than life kind of brands and artists, and I think when I think about Little Feat, I think about, I think about the classics, right? You think about Willin and Dixie Chicken and all these like staples of American music, right? And I'm curious about you joining the band at this point in their career, and like how it felt to kind of how it felt to jump into almost 60 years into this classic band.
Well, the answer is it was very jarring for me. Just to kind of fast forward through that narrative and what got me to Little Feat. Summer of 2015, or 16. I can't remember. It's kind of a blur. One of those summers, Gregg Allman Band was on a double bill tour with the Doobie Brothers, and I got to sit in with Bill Payne, keyboardist for Little Feat, who was playing keyboards with the Doobies at that time, and played with the Doobies several times, just playing a shuffle blues with them every night, and then doing my set with Gregg, and got to know those guys, and got to meet Bill through that. Then Gregg passes away in 2017. When he passes away, the Doobie Brothers take the Gregg Allman Band's percussionist, my friend Mark Quinones, the horns, Mark and Art from Memphis, Mark Franklin, Art Edmondson, our tour manager, our merch person. So all of a sudden there was this whole Gregg Allman Band influx into the Doobie universe. 2 or 3 years of me touring all over the country and the world as a solo artist, and then fall of 2019, Jay from the from the Gregg Allman Band, the sax player, is on tour with Little Feat, and he and the guys in the Doobie camp and everyone was recommending me as a sub for Paul Barrere for 2 shows, because they had Larry Campbell and Teresa Williams, who are friends of mine, out with them opening for them and filling the role of Paul, but they couldn't make the last 2 shows of a leg at the end of a tour leg. So everyone was piling on Bill about calling me, and I think Bill at the time didn't realize that I was also a singer-songwriter. He knew I was a band leader, guitarist. So he called me, and I basically told him, this music is my DNA. My Beatles and Rolling Stones in my childhood were the Allman Brothers and Little Feat. So the fact that I had already taken on the task of being Gregg Allman's band leader, co-producer, guitarist, songwriter for almost a decade, it gave me the gravitas to take 3 weeks, learn 25 songs from the Little Feat catalog on vocals and guitars, and come in and play a gig with them. The twist was, the first gig I showed up to play with Little Feat of the 2, Paul Barrere passed away that morning of that first show. So when I met Fred and Kenny and Sam for the first time, they just found out that their friend had passed away, and they had to carry on with the show. And of course, we opened that show, that Little Feat show, with Bill telling the audience, who did not know Paul had passed away yet.
Oh, wow.
And then I had to play that 2-hour show with them. And at the end of that show, there was, with music, everything's about energy. And at the end of that show, there was an energy around the transference of that moment that was something we all didn't even have to talk about. We had just made the transition. And it was a tragic and elegant passing of the baton for me. We played a few more shows. We went to Jamaica in February 2020, and then the world shut down, which we've already addressed earlier today. And during the COVID pandemic, we changed drummers in May of 2020 to Tony Leone, who was doing distance recording with us to do videos. We changed management in the fall of 2020 to Vector, first with Ken Levitan and then with Brian Penix handling our day-to-day lives. And then we hit the road in December 2021, and we've been cranking ever since.
Man, so much in there. Do you ever? All right, so you're talking. You're the music, the band leader for the Gregg Allman Band, right? And now with Little Feat and playing with the Doobie Brothers and like all of these. Is there ever a moment where you kind of look around and go, holy shit, this is my life? Or do you get used to it? Is it like, you get used to there's Gregg Allman? Or are you on stage going like, fucking hey, there's Gregg Allman and I'm leading the band?
Yeah, I mean, there's that Zelig element to my life. Google that if you guys don't know it. There's some parables to that, but what really happened to me, to be honest with you, man, is I went through, I moved to New York City with my band, the Chesterfields, in the summer of '96. I was a child, found a rent-controlled apartment in the East Village, which was even a diamond in the rough then. And we worked our asses off, and we had Ahmet Ertegun and Russ Titleman behind us and all these like industry legends trying to get us signed. I had an offer at one point to be they wanted to make me the guitar version of Peter Cincotti, the jazz singer. You know, in the late 90s, they had like Tommy LaPuma was going to produce me and stuff, and I wanted to be like, you know, Little Feat or the Allman Brothers or Led Zeppelin or the Band. I mean, that was who I wanted to be. I wanted to be in like a salon of singer-songwriters, which was what my band, the Chesterfields, was. It was a partnership with my friends from high school, who were these. I went to this amazing arts high school in Milwaukee, and we moved here en masse. And everyone in the Chesterfields was a talented singer-songwriter, and we hired the best musicians in New York to play with us. And we were a 10-piece band. We made a record called Henry Street Soul. It got, I mean, Rob Thomas was a huge fan of that record. That record was a big part of the song Smooth even coming into existence, was him hearing that, the fusion of styles we were doing back then. And that band was doing what Wolfpack and Tedeschi Trucks are doing now. We were doing that in 98, 99, 2000. So I kept pushing. The band eventually broke up. I went solo. A number of great industry people tried to help me with that. But the music business was collapsing around me in the early 2000s. And the legends were peeling away into chairmanships and retirement. And the legends, Ahmet Ertegun, for example, was someone who was a big champion of mine. And he's a real tastemaker. You know, he's the guy who signed Ray Charles and set him loose on his own sound, and who acquired Stax Records and became a international distributor for them. He created a safe haven for people like John Coltrane and Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones in the 70s. He would hang out with musicians and artists. He was a true patron. People like that have always gotten what I'm trying to do. The new breed, at first, corporate kids who wanted to get ahead and pander to demographic radio, did not have time for me. And now it's become content acquisition hedge funds are what labels are now. There's no one home who's like fostering artists. So this is the long answer to your question is my hero, one of my heroes showed up to give me a job. I was ready to quit the music business in the summer of 2008. And my friend Jay Collins called me and invited me to sit in with the Allman Brothers because they wanted to make a guitar change in the Gregg Allman Band. Jay was already the band leader for the Gregg Allman Band at the time. And I went and sat in, and Gregg walked up to me and he goes, "You're in my band now." So I was 29 years old. I was about to go to NYU to study film scoring and music education because I've always taken music on in totality. I mean, I've always played all the instruments. I've always been fascinated with Quincy Jones and Henry Mancini and how music works. And I joined Gregg's band, and it became this unexpected side trip. And you know, when Gregg passed away, I tried to do the solo thing. I had a great manager who was an independent guy, and he came out of the ticketing side of music, and we tried like hell and we fought like hell, and I toured everywhere in the world in a van in my 40s with little kids at home, and I was done. I was done. And fall of 2019, all of a sudden I get a call from Bill Payne, and here you and I sit.
Man, that's awesome. So, okay, so fast forwarding to 2019 and all the way through to today, the new record, like I said, is absolutely wonderful. And I mean, it comes like one of the things that I really like about it is there's a couple things that I really like about it. One is it's 13 songs, some of which are pretty long. Like the record takes a while, and I love that. Like I think sometimes folks are ready to get like a 30-minute in and out kind of record, and for me, if the songs are good, give me more of them, and give me more of the thing if it's that good, and this is that good. So I'm grateful that it does include these like 5.5-minute songs, some of them, and there's 13 of them, and every single one of them delivers, and it comes out the gate with 4 Days of Heaven, 3 Days of Work, which is like a standout on the record. It comes out the gate hot. What does the process look like for y'all, especially you joining so late into the band's career? Like, what does the creative process look like for Little Feat and leading up to making this wonderful record?
Well, thanks for all that, man. I mean, it means a lot to hear that you're hearing that, because I think, you know, all right, look, they're first of all the credit goes to my band. And to the fact that what we did is we set ourselves up with Little Feat so that we have our own record label. And MRI, who distributes us, and our management, Vector, they gave us complete creative freedom to do our music. And what a luxury. That's first. Second is Little Feat had not made a studio album since Rooster Rag, which I think came out 14 years ago. So this was like making a debut album. And I don't think you've ever, I don't know if you've ever heard that, that saying about a debut album. It's like, it's a lifetime of work into the first album, and then it's like 10 months of work into the second album.
Yeah.
So this was like 14 years of no Little Feat studio album, one pandemic where we all sat at home, and I wrote all 4 of the songs that I wrote by myself on the record. I wrote the first one after my first Little Feat gig, which was Midnight Flight. And then the other 3 I wrote at the beginning of the pandemic. So those had just been sitting in a hopper. And then the songs that Bill wrote, Bill wrote that song with Robert Hunter when he was doing Rooster Rag, because that song also has Robert Hunter collabs. So that might be 15 years old. Then again, during the pandemic and the Vector transition, Bill gets, hooked up with Charlie Starr from Blackberry Smoke. They write Bayou Mama. I don't know how I think John Leventhal came and sat in with us at the Beacon, and then when we came back in 21, and then Bill wrote a song with him. The song you mentioned, the first song on the record, 4 Days of Heaven. Bill and Tony and I had a songwriting session in New York that came out of. There was a title and some lyrics that Bill brought in, and then we all kind of came up with the music and the rest of the words. So, 5 years of song, 4 or 5 years of conscious songwriting or whatever it was, going into the studio, and then the 14-year gap between albums and the change of your drummer and your lead vocalist guitarist. That's a lot of new blood. And I've been calling this record, Let It Roll 2.0, because my inspiration was I went to my first Little Feat show when I was 13 and saw them with Craig Fuller doing the Let It Roll album. And to me, the music from that record, the way that band was playing live was as vital as any of the stuff I heard with Lowell, like on Waiting for Columbus, or the stuff I grew up with. So same way with when I first saw the Allman Brothers that year, they were promoting Seven Turns, and they had Warren Haynes instead of Dwayne Allman, and it was equally inspiring to me as a young person. So it wasn't as hard as saying, oh, well, we're going to do this album without Lowell George, because I've seen that this band has retained its magic against all odds before. So we tried to use that as, fuel for the fire too.
How do you maintain that magic? Some bands will carry on the name after people pass away, after lineup changes, and it doesn't work. And I'm not going to name any particular names, but like, it doesn't work. It doesn't sound right. It's not the same band. Whereas the Allmans were able to do it with multiple lineup changes. You mentioned Warren coming into the band, fitting right in. And you all are able to do it, where you keep the essence of the Little Feat thing, and yet the band looks quite different from its original iteration. How do you maintain that magic? How do you make that work?
All these bands, from the post-Beatles renaissance, let's call it, of the 60s and 70s, my favorite bands, whether they be you have, on the Brit side, you have Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. On the American side, which was always the most important to me, was Little Feat, the Allman Brothers, and the band. That was my triumvirate growing up. And that translated well into my youth, going to CD shops in the 90s was Los Lobos and NRBQ were kind of my childhood modern, takes on. Again, it's that format of the Beatles. It's the multiple singer-songwriters under one roof, pulling from any genre, whether it be Tin Pan Alley or Delta Blues to New Orleans funk or Hank Williams or whatever it may be. Everything's on the table. It's all about doing what's best for the song. who's playing, you know, even with the band and the Beatles, it was even about switching instruments to get a fresh flavor on a song. And that was very inspiring to me growing up. The thing that those bands maintain, the bands who really last, are the bands who keep their sense of like childhood wonderment around music and obsession with music and humility around music. Because I'll tell you something I've observed with living with Gregg Allman on a bus for almost a decade and living with Little Feat on a bus for a few years now is same playlists, same books, same movies, same conversations, same energy. And the energy is you always feel like you're a bunch of high school kids who just successfully figured out how to play Louie Louie or Manish Boy or whatever, or Route 66 or whatever it may be. You're always that band who you look at each other and you go, my God, we did it again. And then you're always that band that puts on that recording of Chuck Berry or Little Richard or Howlin' Wolf or Hank Williams, and you sit there together and you listen to it. You go, how did they do it? And I used to watch Gregg Allman do that. And I watched the guys in Little Feat do that. When you sit in the back lounge in their buses, they're the same playlist. It's always, the thing that freaked me out the most was my first night on the Little Feat bus. They put on that great, legendary Jimmy Smith organ album, the Sermon. And Gregg, every night when he'd go back in his lounge, he'd put on the Sermon. I could not believe they both started the jam with the Sermon. And most people don't realize, this is why I have my band that I do when I'm off the road with Little Feat, Eldorado Slim, is we play all that jazz funk music of the 60s and 70s in that band, because in those lounges, that's the stuff you hear the most. Is like Jimmy Smith and Kool and the Gang and Grant Green and like all that kind of stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And by the way, Miles Davis and Coltrane all day and all night. Like Kind of Blue and Love Supreme are two of the most important rock albums ever made. They are the albums that started the Grateful Dead and the Allman Brothers and Little Feat. They're the albums. That's their biggest inspiration for when they improvise and when they stretch things out. And people think, oh, these guys came up with this just so people can like dance around in a circle and do acid. No, they got into that because they heard those jazz albums, those modal 1 or 2 chord jazz jam records that were thematic around spirituality, that like sounded like movies, that had like all these different characters and moving parts. So that's how you maintain the magic. You finish the gig, you go back to the lounge and you listen to Bitches Brew and you go, fuck, how did he do this? How the fuck did he do this? And the next night you try to incorporate it on stage. And sometimes you fall on your face and sometimes you don't. And the beauty of rock and roll is that the beauty of it is people don't have to know about that. They're getting it by osmosis.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's fascinating to me, because I think if I was going to ask you what they were listening to, and I thought, like, trying to think 3 plays ahead, I would assume you were going to tell me Delta Blues. It feels like so many artists, that's what they gravitate toward. It makes a ton of sense, though, that these particular bands are so into jazz, given the product of the music ultimately. So that's fascinating to me. Like, to hear Grant Green's name, one of my favorite guitarists, by the way, and one of my favorite artists, period, is really interesting to me. But it makes a ton of sense having heard you say that. I just wouldn't have predicted it, which I should have. That's really interesting, man.
Well, I'll send you the YouTube channel from my group Eldorado Slim. We've been playing. That's an old Little Feat instrumental, by the way, that we've adapted to this group, and it's an organ trio with 2 horns and percussion. And
cool.
Tony from Little Feat plays drums in the band, Tony Leone as well. And we just play instrumentals, and we play all this music from the 70s. And our little treats are we do in memory of Elizabeth Reed and Eldorado Slim, just to highlight you know, with the horns playing those melodies instead of the guitars, and having the organ bass instead of a bass player, it kind of reframes it back to, it puts it in that playlist from the lounge, and it shows you, you know, how that transition was made. People really love the band. We have a lot of fun. It's just something I do. Like, we do about a dozen shows a year in the Northeast just to stretch our legs and have fun, and I do it with the most incredible musicians from New York City. They're the best, and it does highlight that. But I think people need to dig a little deeper, and I know it's, you know, the whole genre of jam band music, it wouldn't exist. It's like equally it would not exist without Robert Johnson, the Beatles, or Miles Davis. They're all mandatory primary ingredients.
What lessons have you learned as a band leader about leadership, especially in these particular spaces?
You have to know when to know where the bodies are buried and when not to.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you want to be a leader, you've got to understand how music works. And if you really want to be a leader, you got to understand how to take care of people around you. And you have to know when to encourage them and when to sort of help them realize that they're going the wrong direction. You need to know how to protect them from all the outside forces that are negative that surround music, and encourage them to celebrate the positive forces that are constantly around us in music. You really have to be somebody who knows how to cut out the noise and deal. And what I mean by where the bodies are buried is it's a very, you know, emerging art and commerce is a very messy thing. And helping, because I never look at it as constantly leading it, you're really helping everyone around you to collaborate successfully. And you're having side conversations with other people in the band, and you're having conversations with two of the guys and one of the guys. And there's always, in any group, I don't care what you're doing as a human, there's factions, there's agendas, there's concepts, there's insecurities, there's all these things to navigate. And what I try to do is, by getting back to Exhibit A, which is that humility and being a childlike garage band in the moment, is I try to lead the creative souls involved back to that, and I try my best to insulate them from what's outside. And I do that by, I probably absorb too much of what's outside a creative unit sometimes. It's probably not good for my mental health, but I know a lot about how production works, not only on a record, but in concerts. And I have a lot of friends, dare I even say, on the commerce side of the music business. You know, I have friends who are promoters. I have friends who are running record labels. I have friends who are even agents and things like that, who actually are like super intelligent tastemaker people who are struggling like we are. But there's so few and far between on that side that it becomes very difficult to protect the bubble. And I think in Little Feat we've been really successful at that. I think we've had a good run with it. You know, nobody gets it perfect, but I feel like this iteration of the band, I think they've had a lot of various forms of dysfunction inside and outside the band for all kinds of reasons throughout their, like you said, almost 60-year career. But I think right now we have a really healthy, open line of communication between, especially everyone in the band. As good as you can get it, though, I think. And I think that's why the Strike Up the Band record resonates, is because it kind of feels like a debut album. It's like, if you think about the first few Little Feat albums, I mean, I consider 72 when they did Dixie Chicken to be the point where Paul Barrere, Sam Clayton, and Kenny Gradney joined the band. That's kind of where the full-on experiment began. You know, the first two were kind of these beautiful, amazing trial balloons. I mean, Sailing Shoes is like my second favorite Little Feat album. But Dixie Chicken is where the groundwork is laid for Waiting for Columbus, which is to me the masterpiece. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's, man, that coming back to that concept of the debut record, that's one of the things that stood out to me on the first listen is how fresh it sounds. And I think that's an interesting concept, again, with a band that's been around so long, that is a legendary American rock band, that you're able to maintain that through line of the essence of the band while also creating something very fresh. That's a really special thing, and I wonder, you know, how conscious you were of that in making the record, of that sort of that alchemy there.
Well, I can't speak for the four members of Little Feat who've been there between, you know, Bill since the band started in '69, and the rest of the fellows, you know, well, Fred was there from the beginning too because he was friends with Wool and got them their first gig. But I'll say from my perspective, and I think it's reflected on the cover to this album. I don't know if you've seen the album cover because we've been hearing previews, but the album cover was literally it's the cover of Let It Roll reduxed.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to that because we saw a lot of album artwork that just was really missing the mark. And Bill Payne and I, since the beginning of the pandemic, we had these long phone conversations occasionally where we were trying to decide if and when humanity regrouped that we would reform the band, what would our template be? And we would talk about Let It Roll 2.0 because Let It Roll was the proof that you could survive losing a genius like Old George. And how could the task get any harder than that? This was not as hard as Let It Roll in that respect.
Mm.
But we had the advantage that we had years to put it together behind the scenes and think about and weigh the options of how to do that. And it became somewhat of an advantage. And I think we decided, you know, the fans will decide if this was a good idea or not, was to literally take the cover of Let It Roll and completely redesign it to kind of say, without saying it out loud, I guess though I am now, we're reinventing the band one more time.
Mm. How over that amount of time, you're going to have diehard fans who've been along for that ride. I know the record's not out yet, but how how do you predict like longtime fans of the band will receive, you know, this sort of reboot, so to speak?
Well, they've been incredibly supportive since we hit the road again in 21. Cool. The Waiting for Columbus tour where we played that album, it sold very well. And it was a cool way to kind of, you know, to introduce this lineup of the band to everybody. We did the blues album, Sam's Place, which we got nominated for a Grammy. That was the other.
That record's great too, man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that was a fun project where we went to, the band had never made a record in Memphis. And we got to, you know, the band finally got to hook up and record with my friends Mark Franklin and Art Edmiston, the horn players who I had in the Gregg Allman Band. And of course, those guys came along for Strike Up the Band too. So that kind of started that Memphis connection. And that doing that blues album was a big setup for this too as a band, because we did that album very quickly and almost everything on there was played and sung live. And we used that template as the starting point for Strike Up the Band too. So you're hearing a lot of our live energy. And I think
cool.
That's probably what's going to sell it to the longtime fans is they've come out, they've heard us play the hits. We pulled out all kinds of songs that the band had not played in many years. You know, we've been doing one of my favorite songs is, well, my favorite songs are like Mercenary Territory and Long Distance Love. We've been doing those a lot. And fans have just not heard those in forever. And I'm a fan. I was raised in a household where that music was on all the time. Some of the first songs I learned to play on the guitar were versions of Willin and Easy to Slip. And, you know, I think, you know, I'm constantly, you know, Bill Payne and I put the set list together for every show. And every time I work on a draft for a set list, I'm constantly thinking about being in the audience and what I would want to hear and You know, what somebody's going to want to hear is bringing their kid for the first time. I mean, that's been a really important part of this iteration of this band. And you're seeing the same thing go on with Dead and Company and people like that who are out on the road now too, where they've got, you know, iterations of the brothers who just played MSG the other night. I'm sure we'll see more from them soon. And I think it's all about that's about introducing people's kids and grandkids to the music. So you got to keep the hits in there. When you come see Little Feat, man, you're not going to hear much from this new album. You're going to hear a couple songs, 2 or 3 songs. You're going to hear a lot of the hits, the classics. You're going to see a celebration of the catalog. You know, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We understand what legacy is about.
Yeah,
and how important that is, and that's very, very important, I think, at this point in this band's career. We've seen other legacy bands who've made new albums go out and tried to play, you know, let's say several of those songs on a gig, and it doesn't work. I mean, I hear it all the time about this from fans, from people in those bands even. You know, man, we went out and tried to do 5 of these things, and it was like everyone was in the bathroom forever. we get that in Little Feat. You know, the original cats get it. Tony and I get it as fans. You know, we get what a gig is versus the album. And honestly, man, to me, this album, Strike Up the Band, we made it the same way these guys have always made records, and the same way I've always strove to make records. I mean, I've made 6 solo albums with my producing partner, Charlie Martinez, and he works for Little Feat too. He did the Sam's Place record, and I've always done it the same way. I've always done records the way I think of it, the way you make a film, you know, where you're the writer, director of the film, and then you've got the actors, and you've got the cinematographer, and you've got the editors, and, you know, you've got all these elements that go into making it cinematic, and an album should be a cinematic journey, the way it's programmed, the way it's played. And that's what we strove to do with Strike Up the Band, and I think the record stands on its own in that respect. It's almost a thing where it's supposed to be not necessarily be something you have to hear the whole thing live. It's something to be enjoyed as a record.
There's so much interesting stuff there. I keep picking up on the fact that you see the whole field, right? You feel like a quarterback to me, like someone who sees the business part of it, also understands the album making part of it, understands the the management of personalities within a band, understands the musical part of it, understands the performance part of it, which is rare, I think. Like, I get to talk to musicians all the time, and some of the the best at what they do, and oftentimes it's like they get the music part and the writing part, but don't necessarily see the business part, or don't necessarily see the performance part, or like you seem to see see the defense, so to speak, and know how to pick it apart. Are there skills is that something you've consciously worked on, or do you just have skills that lend themselves that lend to having the ability to see the whole field that way?
I mean, the short answer to that is I've just always ended up in this role since I was a teenager, maybe even before. I mean, I remember at 13 years old putting together my first band, and all the other guys in the band were, you know, juniors in high school, and I was already telling them, you know, learning their parts on drums and teaching them, and like making charts and like organizing people. And then I went to an arts high school, same thing. By the time I was a senior in the arts high school, I had my own freshman ensembles I was teaching. I was already an adjunct teacher at the school when I was a senior in high school.
Wow.
And every band I've ever been in, it's just happened. Gregg Allman, I joined him as a guitarist. Within 2 years, we were writing songs. Within 4 years, I was the band leader. You know, within 5 years, I was producing the live album with him. And then in year 7 or 8 or whatever it was, I produced an album with him and Don Was. You know, it just went and went and went. And then with Little Feat, it's been a similar cadence. I mean, really, it's a partnership between Bill Payne and I. I mean, Bill is the band leader. Bill has been there since the beginning, but I do, you know, we do work on the set list together. We did all the pre-production for this album was done by Bill and I. I mean, we organized all the demos and songs and then got them to the band and did co-writing within the band, and we used management to help us connect the dots, and management brought in Vance Powell to produce with us and engineer the record and do the record in Nashville. So it's a team effort always. And I think the idea is not even necessarily, I don't know if the quarterback analogy even works. My greatest hero is Quincy Jones. May he rest in peace. I've always wanted to be that person in music since I was a kid. And sadly for that goal, I've attained a version of it, but I haven't really reached my full potential with that yet because of the constant touring side of music right now, because everybody has to tour and sell T-shirts and hats to make money.
Yeah.
And it's, it's all sweat equity now. And I think it's a shame because, when Steely Dan made records, I mean, the reason Asia is like the best audio quality of all time in rock, and perhaps in all of recorded music, is because they spent 2 years in the studio and didn't tour at all. Whittlefeet's Let It Roll album, I mean, I was told they were in for weeks and weeks in these expensive rehearsals, and then, on and off for a year period at the best studio in Los Angeles with George Massenburg and Peter Asher managing and Warner Brothers behind it. I mean, it's a completely different methodology to get to the end product. I mean, Strike Up the Band, this record's like a miracle in the fact that we had 3 days of rehearsal and 1 week as a band of recording.
Wow.
And we hadn't played any of these songs in a live setting before the recording of this album.
Wow.
So that's a lot of hustle, man. And it's exhausting. And I think, when you sit around and wonder why the recorded arts are in such bad shape, go back to Exhibit A, where it's like, look at what everybody has to do to make a living and how they're using their time. It's pretty, when you step back and look at it, it's pretty fascinating that we're able to even get anything done these days.
Well, yeah, it's remarkable. That's a great point. It's remarkable how much great music there is out there right now. I mean, I feel like I'm constantly drowning in wonderful music, which is a nice problem to have. But the fact that anybody gets it done, I've started to dip my toe into performing my songs live, and it's like a later in life serious hobby, and I want to make a record of my original songs, and man, that feels daunting. It feels like there's just so much that goes into it, and it is remarkable to me that so much great music happens. And you telling me that 3 days of rehearsal and then you only had a week, and these songs you hadn't had a chance to play live, it's incredible that this record turned out so outstanding.
I agree. I mean, it's in a sense a small miracle, but when you get the right people together with the right material, and then I think the key is us playing all those live gigs and doing the blues album, because it's just a bunch of live playing, live in the studio, live on stage, and listening and having big ears and learning, kind of like a basketball team, the way they run down the court. Knowing how to do plays and work on the fly. Because that song, 4 Days of Heaven, for example, everything on that track, except for the horns, is live. My lead vocal, everything we're doing.
Wow.
It was funny because the first day in the studio, Vance Powell, who's an absolutely incredible engineer and mixer, he had me set up to do like scratch vocals and scratch guitars. And I said, Vance, we got to reset this whole thing. And he's like, what do you mean? We'll do the vocal after we get the take. I said, no, you're going to get the vocal when we do the take. And a lot of the stuff I sang, we kept either parts or the entire vocal of the rhythm guitar that I was playing. I overdubbed a lot of the lead guitars, but the rhythm guitar. But that song, the first song, is entirely live, except for the horns.
Man, that's fantastic. You described in somewhere in the press materials or somewhere I saw an interview, you described Little Feat, this iteration at least, as gonzo funk.
That's starting to make the rounds.
I
don't know.
love
Maybe
that.
maybe we should copyright that for the band. I don't know.
I think you should. I think you should. It's fucking good. Can you say more about it? Because I just think that's so descriptive and wonderful.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I grew up on this band, and they're one of my templates for all the music I've ever made in my life. So I had a lot of time to think about this. I grew up with my babysitter when I was very young, like 7, 8, 9 years old, was Russ Gibb, and he was the Bill Graham of the Midwest. He had the Grandy Ballroom in Detroit, where all those bands would play in the 60s and 70s. And Russ was my babysitter, and I would sit there, and he would give me, he'd put on Bobby Bland records and give me, have me feed his dog M&Ms while I read R. Crumb comics. And I think that's basically what happened to me. And when I heard Little Feat the first time, it was like I heard the words of Hunter S. Thompson, and I heard the music of the Meters and Thelonious Monk, like all at once.
Oh, wow. Uh-huh.
And this is when I was like 10 years old. Okay, so I'd already kind of like started all that stuff was around when I was a kid, and I was, even at 10 or 11, I was trying to process and understand. I mean, look, I have two boys. They're 8 and 13, and I haven't really, I haven't exposed them to things in this detail and level, but that was just how I was raised in the 1980s. And I was also, my first tape I ever bought was, Thriller, followed by, 1984 and Purple Rain. So I had a lot of home court advantages looking at it in retrospect. I mean, Jesus Christ, you listen to Huey Lewis now, and if Huey Lewis came out now, he'd be the most important recording artist in the world. Things have really slipped. And I like Huey Lewis a lot. That's full respect to Huey Lewis, but back then I remember everyone measuring him up against Prince. It's so he'd have a tough time in that fight.
Yeah, that's not fair. Yeah,
and I think he'd be the first to tell you that. So, but my point is that the Gonzo Funk was just like, look, this band, Little Feat, crafted their own take on rock and roll. And to me, it really came down to like the American version of the British art school, right? All those guys at British art school ended up forming the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, all these bands that had these incredible, like huge, like epic visions of music. Mm-hmm. And the blues was the roux and the gumbo, and then everything else was like on the table. But Little Feat carved out their own unique funk, because when in 1972, when they brought in particular, they always had a funk to them in the first two albums, but when they brought in Kenny Gradney, Sam Clayton in particular. Now Kenny and Sam have their roots from Louisiana, and they are actually from Louisiana in their family lines. And they brought in the literal Rosetta Stone funk, which is the New Orleans funk, to the band. And as the band absorbed that, and they began, Lowell ended up going on all these field trips to New Orleans, where he'd end up playing on Alan Toussaint, Meters Records, Robert Palmer Records with those guys. And he became, the rock and roll doctor is actually Alan Toussaint. That song was written about Alan Toussaint. Because he was kind of a mentor, I think, to Lil George. So these guys are legit bona fides New Orleans funk artists, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a different level. And bands like Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones, they've admitted it in many articles, they would go to Little Feat shows and obsess about Little Feat the same way they would the Meters. That's wild. So they're kind of a sister band to the Meters, really, Little Feat, in a way, And the Gonzo is just, that's Paul Barrere, Lil George, and Richie Hayward and Bill, because those guys are complete intellects. I mean, high level intellects. And just they voraciously read everything and see every film and talk about it. And now I've heard this obviously about Paul, Richie, and Lowell ad infinitum, but I've experienced it with Bill, and the stories I've heard particularly from Kenny about, Richie, Paul, and Lowell and their sense of humor and like what they were into. And I think that I even heard stories about maybe Richie and Paul hanging out with Hunter S. Thompson and going to the ranch and stuff. So there's a certain aesthetic to that that I think this band has captured, that has set them apart from other rock bands, is the gonzo funk. Because other bands will do versions of soul ballads and rockers and boogie woogie and folk and country tinged pieces. You hear that in all these other bands, but the gonzo funk, Little Feat's got the lock on that. Nobody else does that.
What a great answer. That's awesome, man. That's so great. I have just a couple. This has been more than I could have asked for, Scott. Thank you so much for everything. I just have
Thanks
a couple.
for having me.
Yeah, dude, this has been such a pleasure. I really appreciate it. There's a couple other quick things for you. One, this incredible career that you've had, these amazing folks that you've gotten to work with. Who are some folks that stand out to you as, like, you mentioned the intellect of all these guys in Little Feat. Who are some folks you've gotten to work with that you're like, that motherfucker's so cool? Like, who are the people that have stood out to you in your career have like impressed you as individuals?
Well, I mean, my greatest inspiration to this day are two people. The first person you'd never heard of, his name was Stokes. He was a blues man in Milwaukee when I was a kid, and he was a guy who B.B. King was a fan of his, and Stokes used to hang out with all the Kings and Earle Hooker and Muddy Waters and all those cats. And if you talk to anyone in Milwaukee who played music in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s, and you say Stokes, they go, oh, he was the best ever.
Wow.
Singing guitar player. He taught me everything about the blues, man. I was 15 years old. My parents took me to a jam session at the Up and Under. He took me under his wing, and I met a number of other people, some of them legends. I met Hubert Sumlin through him and Pine Top Perkins, and my teens were incredibly rich, and Stokes was the guy who really inspired me to get much better at singing in particular, but also to sing on the guitar and to think about a lyric and how you're delivering a lyric and how your guitar playing does that. And Stokes was from Mississippi, man. He was old school. He as far as I know, he just didn't have a lot of education, but he was one of the most profound cats I ever met. And he put me on the path, man. He gave me all the tools to learn anything I wanted, because if you can learn the blues, you can play anything. And I would never, ever claim to be a blues man. People have tried to label my music blues, and I've been forced to release albums as blues one time, and I absolutely hated it, because I do think that blues is kind of it's almost a sacred African griot tradition. Mm-hmm. We can study it the way Van Gogh studied Japanese screen painting or something, but we can't ever actually do it. But we must know it to be able to play American music. If you don't know it, if you don't know the history, and you can't play it and understand it structurally and feel it, you can't play rock and roll. So I have Stokes to thank for that. And then the other one is Gregg Allman, man. I mean, without Gregg, I don't know if I would have been fully up to the task spiritually for playing and singing in Little Feat. I think I could have done it technically. I could have done a good job. But, Gregg, it was like, talking about Quincy Jones, my model was like Quincy with Frank Sinatra. That was when Quincy worked with Frank Sinatra, that was sort of his apprenticeship period of what was next for him. And for me, that's what it was with Gregg Allman. It was playing with Frank Sinatra, because you were playing with somebody who was an icon and a vocalist who would sit down, in his case, at the organ, dressed the way he would, and the entire energy of the entire room would go to him. And he would take people on a trip with his voice. There were no pyrotechnics. There were no tricks. It was just incredible songwriting delivered from the heart, beautifully night after night. And it just is something I think about every time I go on stage. And I can't explain what that is, but it happens. Stevie Wonder has it, Ray Charles, I mentioned Prince already, Coltrane, Miles Davis, Lowell George. There are people who are born with it, who just have this thing. And, my trip through rock and roll and through music in general has been, I've tried, it's a big try, as I've tried to be a facilitator in the mold of someone like Quincy, who just, you stand next to greatness and you try to figure what can I contribute to this? How can I make this more connective to the audience? How can I enhance the story? How can I be part of the story? How can I enhance being a storyteller with this person? And that's my job, man. That's just what I'm so passionate about it, and I love it. And I've been so blessed to work with these guys in Little Feat and Gregg and Stokes and, you know, and Levon Helm, and, you know, that's a whole nother podcast to talk about. I mean, it's just all these cats are the same, though.
I can't believe we're an hour in and we just now are talking about Levon. That's
I mean,
awesome.
I had a limited experience with Levon, but I recorded with him and I played with him live. I played his last show as his guitar player. I'm very close with Jay Collins, who's he's the father of Levon's grandchildren, and Amy Helm, his ex-wife, who's just a phenomenal artist.
She's also so good. She's so good.
Great singer-songwriter. I mean, has her own thing, but also, you know, maintains the tradition. And I've been living in New York City for 28 years, and I've been going up playing in Woodstock for at least 25, and I've known that family for a long, long time. And you know, the short part of that story to this is it's all the same thing. Again, it's all the same bus. It's all the same ethos. You know, it's all one big family.
What was Levon like?
Incredibly charismatic.
I bet.
And I never saw him turn it off. I'm sure he did, but he just was the most charming, you know, kind of like Gregg in a Southern Gentleman sense, but a little bit more outgoing than Gregg. A little bit more of like well, he's a drummer, so, you know, drummers are like, they're the truck driver of the band. You know, they drive the truck. So
yeah.
Levon had that attitude about him, and he was a really fun band leader. Totally like there were things that were, they had a way where like they knew how the songs were going to go, but there was always a spontaneous energy, particularly to the rambles. And I credit Jimmy Vivino and Larry Campbell for that. They would kind of ride the lightning with Levon. There was a certain anything can happen vibe that I really loved. And Levon, you know, again, like Gregg, and this is probably a very Southern thing, is, you know, would always kind of, one of the fun screeds I would hear him do sometimes is like, I don't know what this Americana thing is supposed to be. It's all just goddamn rock and roll. I can't understand. You know? The last Gregg Allman album that I did with Gregg, where we wrote, you know, the songs together, and I worked on with him and Don was Southern Blood, and that was nominated for 2 Grammys. And when we were getting ready, when we were finishing the mixes for the album, I remember Gregg told me, he said, man, they want to release this as Americana. He's like, what the hell's an Americana? And I said, Gregg, it's what they, you know, Levon had already won Grammys for it. So I said, well, Levon won Grammys as an Americana. He goes, that's what they call rock and roll now. Now I get it. So now we've come full circle to your Jason Isbell t-shirt.
That's so great. Oh my God. All right. We usually end on what you're getting down on. So that's the art that has you fired up at the moment. It could be a book you're reading, could be music you're listening to, film you saw. What art are you consuming?
You understand how dangerous a question that is with me, right?
I do. After spending an hour with you, I can't wait for your answer.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus Christ. I consume media at a Herculean level. So, quickly, Substack. I have so many people I love. Podcasts. So many people I love across so many different disciplines. On the music tip, I love Questlove's podcast. I love the One Song Show is really fun. Rick Rubin's is pretty fun.
Yeah.
You know, those are cool. And then I would say, like, I'm a voracious reader, but I'm reading that new Joe Boyd book right now. Do you know Joe Boyd, the record producer, the English record producer? He's got this book, Where Only the Rhythm Remains. I just started it. I'm 10 pages into it, and he's discussing the origins of Paul Simon's Graceland record, and it's maybe the most fascinating chapter I've ever read in a book about music. I mean, it is cool. It's already got me, and the thing is like fucking 800 pages. So good luck with that.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the new Murakami book, of course.
That's what I just started yesterday.
I'm way into him.
Yeah. I just cracked the spine yesterday. That's fucking wild. Yeah.
I'm usually reading 3 or 4 books at once. I read a lot of magazines. Obviously, you know, I'm a passionate lefty, so it's like New Yorker, Atlantic, all that stuff.
Oh yeah, I subscribe to the Atlantic.
Paris Review. I voraciously read the Paris Review every time it comes out. Musically, my kids are way into the '80s because of Stranger Things, which is probably why I mentioned Huey Lewis earlier.
Cool.
So I've been making mixes of that music for them, and I'm starting to realize like how well built all that music was and how great it all is. Because I kind of turned. There's been periods, with the exception of like Prince and Michael Jackson, I turned my back on some of that stuff. But
same.
I've been making mixes of that. WWOZ all day long, New Orleans radio station, the world's greatest radio station. Get the app, put it on your phone, put it on all day. On Saturdays, I turn it on at 9 a.m. and I don't turn it off until I go to sleep. And it is a music education class across world music, soul music, blues, pop, they play everything all day on Saturday, and it's unbelievable.
Okay.
So that's a good, you know, overview. But yeah, there's a million things, man. I think to really be a musician and try to be an artist in that space, it's like you got to be constantly digesting everything. It all comes down to being a storyteller, man. Every artistic discipline. So every artistic discipline will teach you. And you know, the best thing I ever did was, and this is, I guess some people could see it as a side note, but it's burying the lead. I mean, the best thing I ever did for my creative output was have a family. For me, I mean, having kids. My wife I've been with through this whole journey, luckily, and she's amazing, and my kids, and having them has been the most incredible source of inspiration. And also editing. It's taught me to edit my relationships, the media and art I consume, to do it with more meaning, to do it with something that's impactful, to use time well. Time becomes the world's most important currency when you're 48 years old and you have a family. So those are the things. So when I'm consuming art and media, I'm trying to do things that reinforce that principle.
Wow. Scott, this is an all-time Marinade conversation, dude. Thank you so much. This was...
I feel well marinated. Put me on the grill.
Oh man, what a punctuation on it too. Man, Strike Up the Band is wonderful. This conversation was delightful. I'm so grateful, man. This is so good. Thank you so much. It's so good to connect with you.
Thanks for having me. You did a great job, buddy. Great questions. Thanks for listening to me yap so much.
My pleasure, man. Have a great rest of your day. And
all right, you too. Take care. Bye.
See ya. Scott Sharrard of Little Feat, everyone. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank all of you for listening. LittleFeat.net for all things Little Feat. ScottSharrard.com for all things Scott Sharrard. MarinadePodcast.com for all things The Marinade. Follow us on all the socials, y'all. Subscribe and give a 5-star rating on your podcast app. Tell a friend about the show. These are all free ways to support The Marinade. Go do that right now while you're listening, please. It makes a huge difference for us and costs so little of your time and energy. I have been talking about this the last few episodes, but I quit my day job. More on that in a minute, and I want to get into it for a second. Speaking of which, I've been dedicating myself to the creative work. So please follow Life's Greatest Hits, my other podcast, over on Instagram, so you can get updates about the show that I do with my dear friend Jordan Foley. We have a new episode on the way later this week. I'm dropping this on Monday, May 12th. This coming Friday, our episode about Medium Raw by Earle James will drop. We're about to be 8 episodes deep with that one, and we recently made a slight shift in format. Instead of doing a vinyl swap like we were doing at the beginning, we now sit down, listen to a record together here at my condo, and then record our impressions right afterward. And the idea was born out of our experience doing just that on the day Jason Isbell's Foxes in the Snow was released. Jordan and I had an absolute blast making that one, and the feedback has been incredibly encouraging. So make sure you subscribe on your podcast app so you don't miss a thing. Life's Greatest Hits. Thank you for listening. If you really like what we're doing with this Marinade thing, please consider joining our Patreon community. Just $2 a month, y'all. You can gain access to Patreon exclusive content, like our show Jason's Journey, where I talk about the moments that shape my creative life and provide a window into the process of making the marinade. As I mentioned, I quit my day job and would really like to make creative work my full-time gig. If you've ever been curious about our Patreon, now would be a great time to dip your toe in the water, see if it's to your liking. We've got some very cool stuff in the works, including a Marinade book club if you're interested. $2 a month, y'all. You can also try a free trial of Patreon. See if you like it. No pressure. Try it for 7 days. Set a reminder on your phone in case you want to cancel. And keep going if you dig it. If you want to support the show financially, but you don't want to commit to a monthly subscription, I totally get that, y'all. You can Venmo or PayPal us. It's just at the Marinade. We've got a lot of stuff that we're planning this summer, including hopefully covering Laurel Cove Festival again this year. If not that, then Bonnaroo again this year. And those experiences only happen because of the generosity of our listeners and our Patreon patrons. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Above all, I'm just grateful you listen and spread the word about the Marinade. Until next time, go out and create something. Cheers, y'all.